Hi, I'm Dr. Rob Rutledge. I'm here with Marie. I'm hoping I'm saying it right now. Um, Marie Ennis-O'Connor is this lovely lady, patient advocate, health blogger, and social media consultant from Ireland. It's lovely
Yeah,
to have share the technology and the wisdom with many, many people. So welcome so much, Marie, to our show.
thank you so much. And yes, you're saying all the right things, not just my name, but lovely lady and all the right things. So I think we're off to a great start. We're off to a really good start.
Thank you so much. You're a sweetheart. So, Marie, I'm wondering if you're willing to share your story prior to the cancer diagnosis, a way to set the context and just be open about what's happened to you and how you changed in a sense of journey. I mean, one of the things you've done is to blog about your journey with breast cancer, and really, if you can take us through the elements of that and how you transformed the transition, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the things I'd like to start off by saying is when you have a diagnosis of cancer, it's a shock for everyone. But I think when you're a young woman, and I was young at the time, not so young now, but young back then. And I think there's particular challenges with being a young woman that has been diagnosed with any serious illness. Because typically you're at a stage in your life where you're maybe dating or maybe newly married, you're getting on with your career, you've got a lot of plans for your future. And I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have plans for your future, but I really think when you're young, a serious illness is the last thing on your mind. So when you hear those words, you've got cancer, I mean, it's like a juggernaut just knocks you off your feet. It's such a shock. So I think the shock was really so intense in the beginning for me. And it took me a long time to just come to terms with that. So that's where I was at in terms of getting that diagnosis. And also, and I've spoken to a lot of cancer survivors, I didn't know I was ill. So it was one of those things where, okay, I was a little bit tired, but I was working hard, I was playing hard. So I didn't think anything of it.
How old were you at that time, Marie? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, so I was 32. I was 32 at the time, which to me now, 10 years later, is very young. But at the time, yeah, I mean, I really thought that breast cancer was something that only happened to older women. And there's no history of breast cancer in my family, which naively I thought protected me. But of course, I realize now, all these years later, and all the work that I've done in patient advocacy, that actually quite a small percentage of breast cancers are hereditary. I think it's something like 10%.
Even smaller, more like about 5%. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. But I think that we protect ourselves with myths. I'm too young to have cancer. There's no history in my family. So we play all these games where we protect ourselves, and we almost feel like, no, that's not the deal. So when we're diagnosed, it's like, no, you've got that wrong. That's absolutely not where my life is going, and that's not the deal. So there's a lot of emotions to process around that. And that's true for everybody that I've spoken to.
Yeah, makes sense. Total sense.
Yeah.
What's the most difficult thing? I mean, it sounds like your life was kind of shattered. Just the expectation of what would happen in the future, and the kind of going through the incredible disbelief at that phase. But as you're getting into the treatments and realizing, geez, I'm going to have to get treated here. What was the most difficult part of that whole experience for you?
Yeah, it was something very personal and individual to me, but also something that I know that a lot of other young women have struggled with. And for me, it wasn't losing my hair, because I actually struggle with my hair sometimes to get it looking like this, Rob. So I lost my hair. Okay, it'll grow back. I was very sick on the chemotherapy. Every single drug, anti-nausea drug that I was given, nothing seemed to work. So I mean, that was pretty rotten. But I could tolerate all of those. The bit I really, really couldn't handle was the fact that it was affecting my fertility. And we talk about the stage of life I was at. I'm married now. I wasn't married then. I was going out with my now husband. He was then my boyfriend. But I had every intention of having a family. It took me, I wasn't in the first flush of youth. I was in my 30s. It had taken me a long time to find this guy. He was the right guy for me. He was the right guy that I wanted to have a family with. So for me, the possibility that the fertility my fertility will be affected because the drugs were so strong. And typically we treat young women with very, very strong regimen of drugs. And also we have that thing, we have the maintenance therapy, so we have hormone therapy that at the time when I was going through it, you took tamoxifen for 5 years, well now it's 10 years. So where does that leave a woman who is, you know, already starting to look at declining fertility because of her age, heading towards her mid-30s? So that was hugely difficult for me to cope with. And that actually set me on that path of being a patient advocate, because I was shocked that I had gone through chemotherapy without anybody ever mentioning that it would have or could have a knock-on effect on fertility. And I was stunned that anybody would let a young woman go through a treatment without telling her that this may be a possibility, without offering some options, without allowing her to explore the options. And I think maybe I may not have made any different choices, but I would have had a choice, and I would have had a choice that I could have come to terms with the choice. So for me, I really struggled against the process because I felt I was cheated out of my choice. And I completely understand that the emphasis is on let's get you well, let's get you better for the long term. But I think that we're neglecting issues. So more and more women, thanks, are surviving, thanks to medical science, are surviving cancer, breast cancer. But then we've got to deal with the knock-on effects. So we need to deal with that whole survivorship issue. So it's not just about saving a life, it's about the quality of that life that's going to be saved. And it's too late sometimes to start thinking about that when treatment is over. So I really feel very, very strongly that we need to start putting processes in place that not just with fertility, but deal with that whole psychosocial aspect of what happens after. So survivorship starts on the day of diagnosis. And it's not just about the treatment, it's about what happens afterwards. So really, I felt so strongly about that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years, is jumping on soapboxes, is writing about that, is speaking about that, and just raising awareness of that. Because I think as well for cancer survivors, we're really shocked at how nobody prepares us for how we feel when treatment finishes.
Right.
And that has led to a lot of emotional and psychological challenges and issues for men and women.
Well, let's take it to that stage, because I think my neck is going to get really sore in this interview because I'm just agreeing with you so much. Anyways, I do want you to talk about the transition. So you went through, it sounds like, very strong chemotherapy, and then so end of treatment. And I know that a lot of people actually melt down because it's like suddenly they're released into their home environment. The medical system no longer watching them very closely. And they kind of held all that kind of stress and tension and everything for so long. They can I see it like time after time, week after week. So maybe you can describe what happened to you and some of our other experiences around that.
Yeah, sure. And I think that what happened to me happens to a lot of people who go through cancer treatment, and exactly what you described. I think you really marshal all your resources. You shore yourself up to get through the treatment. You grit your teeth. And also there's a real routine to it, so you know exactly when your next appointment is going to be, you know exactly when your next chemo infusion is going to be, you know when your radiotherapy is going to be, and it's like almost like having a job. So you get up in the morning, you go to your job, you look after yourself, you eat certain things or you can't eat certain things. So this whole routine, and the day that you finish your treatment, the routine completely collapses, and nobody prepares you, and it really surprises me. And maybe it's changed, and there's more talking about that now. But honestly, it hit me just with such a shock that I felt so rotten when it finished. And I read afterwards that two of the most stressful times in a cancer patient's life is the day of diagnosis and the day the treatment ends. So it's a whole new chapter that begins. And of course, the idea, a lot of people around you think, well, that's it, treatment finished, story over. But of course, the story isn't over. And in a way, real healing begins now. So while your body had been focused on what was being physically done to you, now you've got to start healing your body from the toxicity, but also healing your mind and your spirit.
Yes. It's so wise. It's so obvious. But you know what? But we don't know about it, is the point, in that, we're going to have a whole conversation about, how we could tweak the medical system around it. But I do want you to kind of continue on with your story. So obviously that was a super difficult time. And then like just tell a bit more around the kind of patient advocacy, you know, when you saw your physicians, what really primed you to say, enough is enough, I've got to start writing about this, I got to start blogging, whatever.
Actually, it was through that whole survival. So I found a lot of resources online. And I'll just go back a little bit and say that I felt incredibly isolated as a young woman in Ireland. I was the only, and I'm not like, younger women with breast cancer are always going to be in the minority when it comes to going to your appointments, and you know, you're always going to see those older people, older ladies, and it's hard to find somebody to speak to. So you have to try to find a survivor, a young woman's group, which actually I think there was about, in fact, I knew nobody when I was going through treatment. So by that reasoning, then you're forced to go online to see if you can find somebody, anybody, anywhere in the world who understands what you're going through and that you can talk to, and you can, you know, you can talk about things like fertility, or you know, about body image or dating or all those things. So for me, I found it online, and that was my first step into just finding that connection. And it was really, really powerful. But I did find it easy to find people when I was going through treatment. But when I finished treatment, I really found it difficult to connect with people. And again, you know, I went back to work and I was trying to get back on with my life again. So for me, when I couldn't find the resources, I decided to start my own. So I started a blog, which is called Journey Beyond Breast Cancer. And I just started it as a way of, like a diary, like a lot of those blogs start, as a way of just getting my feelings out there. And it's incredibly cathartic and therapeutic to just be able to write down those feelings. And I know I actually have a sister who's incredibly pride, and she says to me, but could you not just have done that in a diary and stuck it under your pillow? Why did you want to write it and have everybody read about your deepest, darkest secrets? But you know what I've learned since then is, well, maybe I'm a bit of an exhibitionist and I need that. So maybe there's that. But no, really, seriously, what I've learned since then is that there is something healing that happens when you share your story and your story is heard and somebody says, me too. Yes. And you're not alone. And if I write that in a diary, it's not the same. So if I can write it and put it out there, and again, it's that whole area of blogging and social media has connected the world. So I connected with so many people from all around the world, from Australia, from the Philippines, from, you know, in the US, from Europe. So I could connect with far more people than I could just sitting in my home or sitting in my workplace. I think that's really important, to be able to share your story and share it in a safe space. So it became really, when I mean, first of all, I thought, well, this is just for me and nobody's going to read this blog. But then people did start to read it. And I noticed that a community started to form. And it became really, really important to me to create a very safe space within that community. And it's a thing that I say to people now, is you need to find your safe space, because you can go online to a lot of forums and a lot of communities, and there can be very strong opinions in that place. And sometimes there can be a lot of criticism around how people do survivorship. I know there's a lot of discussion around, you know, being positive during treatment, or, you know, you don't have to be positive, you should be positive. And I've seen a lot of people getting very anxious around that discussion. So I've always said, you do cancer your way. So whatever way is right for you, and don't ever feel forced. So if anybody is listening to this and, you know, maybe they ventured online and they've found a certain community that doesn't resonate with them, I have to say, just keep looking, because you will find your tribe, you will find your community. And to me, that's so important. And it's so important to protect yourself, but really to find those that resonate, whose stories resonate with you, and that you can be honest and open with and feel safe with. And the minute you don't feel that, get out of there, because that is not going to help your healing.
Yes. Okay. I'm taking some extra medication here. It's starting to hurt. You know what? There's so much lived wisdom there, and you know, I reflect so much. One of them. So we actually been doing weekend retreats, coming up on our 50th retreat, almost 2,000 people. And we did actually a little research project to find out what was helpful from the weekend retreats. And one of the most powerful things was that people didn't feel so isolated. And it's very, very powerful there. And just, I have to so reflect that the journey is such an individual journey that there's no right or wrong way, and that we have to listen to our heart, have to listen to our intuition as to what works for us. And so thank you so much for just stating that great wisdom. I so appreciate that. So tell me, Thank you. Tell me.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, it was really good to hear that feedback as well, and it was very interesting
I mean,
as well.
the well, there's also the stress physiology that when we feel less isolated when we're undergoing stressful events, it has less of a physiological damaging effect on our body. So there's really good science around that as well.
Yes.
I wanted you to talk about the power of story, the power of narrative, and the power of transforming one's story in one's life. Can you reflect on that idea as you tell us a bit more about what happened within your journey?
Oh, sure. I mean, I could actually talk about story and narrative. I just fell in love with the power of words over the last few years. And I think that one of the things, I don't believe in saying that cancer is a gift, or, I don't like to say that, but I think that you can also see a gift in something. And one of the gifts that I saw in it was the ability to stop everything, to stop the busyness of life, and to really go within. And for me, it was rediscovering a love of writing that I had from a child. But for me, I'm a real perfectionist. And if I couldn't be like a best-selling author, I was never going to be a writer. But I discovered that I could tell my story, and it didn't have to be perfect. So I discovered a way through cancer of letting go of a lot of perfection, and that you can tell an imperfect story. And then I discovered that that the real healing began when people shared a story that was imperfect and that was vulnerable, and that you could connect with that. And in hearing that, you could heal that story within yourself, and you could also see how you could help somebody else heal their story. So I've been absolutely blown away by the power of story, and how it's a precious, precious, precious gift, and how it's not just about telling your story, but my goodness, the gift you can give to somebody when you take their story and you hold it. Sometimes you just even need somebody just to hold your story, because we know that there isn't an answer for a lot of the pain and suffering in this world, but being able to speak your truth, and even more so to have and hold it for you, it's mind-blowing. It's actually mind-blowing. It sounds like such a simple intervention, but it's very difficult to do, because we always want to, tell our own story, or we want to jump in and fix somebody's story. I think that's a huge thing, is that we want to fix somebody's story. But it's just knowing that, my story's broken sometimes, and that's okay. You can just hold that broken story for somebody. And that has been guiding light for my blog. As I said, it's 10 years since I had, well, it's actually just a little over, it'll be over 10 years this year that I had my breast cancer diagnosis. And sometimes people say, why are you still writing about it? Have you not moved on? But I think I read a quote once by Albert Schweitzer, and he said something about, when you overcome suffering, that suffering, you owe it to other people to help them come through that suffering too. And I really, really feel that. I feel that you mentioned words like wisdom. I mean, the wisdom that myself and so many other cancer survivors have is so hard won. I mean, that was so hard. There was so many dark nights of the soul to get to this point. And if anything can come from it, if there's some way that we can, somebody gave me a beautiful image once. I actually run storytelling workshops, and somebody gave me a beautiful image about it being like a river, and we're all in different stones across the river, and some of us slip behind, but there's always somebody ahead just to bring us along on the next stone or the next step on that path. And a beautiful image that somebody spoke about in one of my workshops, and I found that amazing, and I hold that image, and I feel very strongly that we owe it to each other.
Yes. I mean, again, just the themes that come in my mind as I'm listening to you there is one is listening is therapeutic in and of itself, that we don't have to correct anything. Our simple presence, our simple love for that person is the therapy. We don't have to fix the situation. That person in front of us has all the wisdom, intuition, spirit to find their own transition, and just being present is what I think is the most powerful thing. And the second idea I wanted to reflect on is, as we're writing our own story, and as we are truly heard and understood, I think actually that's my job, is actually just to understand that person in front of me. That's, I think, the power of that relationship. But I'm thinking as we're writing our story and as we're heard, there's this idea of self-love and self-compassion. And I'm just reading that next book called Self-Compassion, kind of the science around that. And I'm sure of it. I think that's part of the power of story, part of the power of journaling, part of the power of just saying, this is how the story's coming out. I don't have to be perfect. I'm perfectly whole just as I am right now in all my imperfections.
Yeah, I struggle a lot with self-compassion, and I think so. I think a lot of women do, actually, and I do struggle a lot with that. But one of the things that I found quite remarkable as well is that it's very easy for me to give out compassion. It's very easy for me to hear somebody's story, to hold them, but it's harder for me to do that for myself. But I found that when I would be vulnerable and share my story and my pain, I would have somebody come back to me and say, Marie, you're so good at telling everybody else to be kind to themselves, not to be so. Can't you take that advice? So after a while, I started to see that if I could, if I could do that for somebody else, why can't I do that for myself? So again, I think a lot of women struggle with that. I don't know why. I think this generation of women are there's very high standards put on women, always has been, but I think this particular generation and the next generation have had huge standards put on them societally, to look a certain way, to be thin, to have perfect breasts, perfect hair. So when you go through something like breast cancer, you lose your hair, you lose your breasts, you lose your femininity. So there's a huge, huge struggle around femininity for women, for young women, for all women. I understand. I really think it's difficult for young women. So I've seen that, and then I see that knock-on effect where, okay, I have to be physically perfect, but I just have to be perfect. So I'm seeing that. I mean, I probably collect so many stories, and I hear so many stories and so many themes, and that's one theme that comes through quite strongly.
Yeah, it reminds me, I'm a huge fan of Brene Brown and her teaching around vulnerability and so on, and hate to break down the genders, but oftentimes, that inner struggle, inner voice for women is, I have to do everything perfectly and I can't look like I'm sweating while I'm doing it. And so that's just an impossible standard. And for men, I mean, I have to look confident. I can't show any weakness. And so
sure.
My teachings and my philosophy is simply be ourselves, to simply be our own vulnerable, open self. And then you don't have to put on an air, a mask to other people. And I think it's a healthy way to be. And then you're actually modeling that openness for thousands of people. And so that is very powerful. And so thank you, first of all, just for all that.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, just on that point, when I first started my blog, I was still working. I worked in a university. I worked in public relations and marketing. So you don't have to look a certain way and be perfect. If there's a lot of expectations around that. But I started my blog anonymously. I did everything anonymously. And then I started, just little bit by little bit, I started to see all these other brave women. And this was just before, this was before Brene Brown even gave us all permission to be vulnerable and to be ourselves. And I saw them sharing those stories. And I thought, wow, I'm getting so much from that. And I just, bit by bit, I started to really want to own my story. I think Brene Brown also says something about, when you can own your story, she has something about owning your story. And I have to say chemo brain now, the quote is gone, but it's a wonderful quote. Once you own your story, you can create a whole new ending. And well, everything Brene Brown says is so wonderful.
I agree.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And stories are just data with soul is one that I use all the time from Brene. So there's that kind of delicate balance between protecting yourself and also, if we all protect ourselves and we keep that secret self hidden, then we can't heal each other. So it's just, somebody has to have the courage to break out of that. And there's another writer that I really love, and her, again, chemo brain, Elizabeth, her name's just after going out of my head, it'll come back later. But she wrote a book called she wrote a chapter in a book called Bozos on the Bus. And she said there were all bozos on the bus. But it just takes one of us to stand up and say, hey, I'm a bozo on the bus. So, but it takes courage to stand up and say, I'm vulnerable, or this is where I hurt, and that just opens the floodgates. So it took me a while. I did start off anonymously, and it took me a while. And it didn't. I was worried about what it would do to my career. I was worried that people would kind of look at me oddly, and you know what? Some of them did, but eventually I actually left that job, and for the last 5 years I've been working doing what I love. I've been working in patient advocacy. I've been working facilitating storytelling workshops, writing a lot, speaking at a lot of international conferences. So I can finally be completely me, and if people don't like it, well,
that's their problem. Yeah.
That's their problem. But it
Yeah.
did take me a long time to reach that. It took me a very long time to reach that. And the only way I did it was by being in the company and also learning from and having somebody model it for me. So me admiring and looking up to somebody who was brave enough to show their weaknesses and their vulnerability. And that gave me the courage to do it too. Without that, I wouldn't have had to do
Right.
it.
And that's why,
I'm not a trailblazer. I'm not a trailblazer. So I wouldn't have had the courage to do it if I hadn't seen other women do it.
Right. But we all play our part, right? We're connecting with all sorts of different people every day, showing our true selves. So and also I just want to reflect on the idea, I like that word journey, and it takes work and it takes time, and we grow over time. And so that's, it's a beautiful blog, Journey Beyond Breast Cancer.
On that point, I've actually had a lot of people complain to me about the name of the blog, and say cancer is not a journey. And, the only thing I can say to that is that's my metaphor. That's the metaphor I use. That doesn't have to be your metaphor. And it goes back to the point we were making earlier. There's no right or wrong way to do cancer. That metaphor works for me, because for me, cancer doesn't begin and end at a certain point. It's a journey. It's not a destination. I'll always carry cancer. I'll always carry the experience. I'm also highly at risk of having a recurrence of cancer. So I don't dwell on that, but I can't pretend that I'm mortal. I know none of us can, but I think when you've had a diagnosis of cancer, you really can't kid yourself anymore, that you're immortal, I should say. So for me, it is a journey. There is no destination. You don't start at point A and finish at point B. It reverberates. I carry the scars. I carry the scars emotionally, and I carry physical scars. I've learned to live with them, and I've learned to integrate them in my life. But sometimes I'm like the stones. I slip back a little bit in that river on my journey. Sometimes I slip back. I have bad days. I have days where, it still hurts. It still hurts to not be able to have a family. Physically I have lymphedema, I have things like that. So you learn to live with it, but it's not over. It doesn't end the day the treatment ends.
Right. Thank you. I'm wondering if you're willing to share a reading or a poem or something that touches your soul in some way.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked me. Bringing it up here, I'm so glad you asked me to do this, because when I actually fell in love with poetry and in stories, and when I was in school, I was taught poetry in a really uninspired way, and I hated it. You had to learn poetry in my school for your exams. So the joy was completely sucked out of learning poetry. So it was a real revelation for me when I could discover a whole new joy and meaning in poetry. I never could have imagined all those years ago when I was sitting in the classroom trying to learn off poems. And I think that all healing is a road back home to our original selves. And I believe that poetry is one of the greatest ways to find way back. So I share a lot of poems on my blog. And just before I read the poem, if we have time, I'd just like to read a couple of lines from a book that I really love. It's by Kim Rosen, and it's called Saved by a Poem, The Transformative Power of Words. And she says that poetry is the most ancient form of prayer. It's a necessary medicine for our times, a companion through difficulty, a guide when we are lost, a salve when we are wounded, and a conduit to an inner source of joy, freedom, and insight. And I love that she says you don't have to love all poetry, but just find one poem that you love and speak it out loud. And your body, your feelings, your voice, and your thoughts will come into harmony when you speak a poem that matters to you. And that in itself can be incredibly healing. So I fell in love with the poetry of Mary Oliver when I first started blogging. So I want to read a poem by Mary Oliver. When I read this poem, I feel all those things. I feel my body come in harmony with the thoughts. And also I found Mary Oliver writes a lot about nature and being in nature, and I find nature incredibly healing. So it's called A Summer Day. Who made the world? Who made the swan, and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who's moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who's gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I've been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild, precious life?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes,
I got goosebumps now.
It is. I do have, and have tears in my eyes. So thank you. Yeah, that is one of my favorite poems too, actually. So and so well read. Thank you so much. That was just absolutely lovely. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Do you get outside? Do you get into nature? Is that part of your healing?
And I love the fact that I'm really busy, and I've kind of slipped back into my habit of being really busy. I travel a lot. I work very, very hard, and sometimes I kind of have to remind myself that it's okay to do nothing. So that poem reminds me that it's okay to do nothing. And I think she also has some other quote about be astonished by your life, pay attention, be astonished, and tell someone about it. So she really knows how to celebrate the ordinary and just the amazing miracle of life. So Oliver, when I discovered her poem, I thought, where has this woman been all my life?
Where was she in high school?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. When I was doing Shakespearean sonnets. So her poetry really moves me very, very deeply.
And on that theme, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about now, but really on that theme is how do we bring soul into the cancer journey? It's really what that reflection, and how is it that we can support people and facilitate healing really from day one? I think that's what you've been blogging about for a long time.
Yeah, and I think retreats like you do are hugely important, but not everybody can get to a retreat. Not everybody can. A lot of us have to go back to work and just kind of resume our life, and there is not enough for people when they go back to work or when they go back to their lives. And sometimes I think a lot of people, when they finish treatment, think they don't belong in a cancer support centre, or they shouldn't go on a retreat and because it's over. So I think we need to do a lot more work around, it's okay 10 years later. There is no, again, back to the journey, there's no end. You don't have to be over cancer. There's no finishing time, like grief. Yes, you go through a process and things heal and things are not so bad, but you can still be suffering 5 years, 10 years. So I like the idea of being able to have spaces for people to who still need that support, even if it's 5 years, even if it's 10 years, 15, 20, whatever. And for me, I'm finding that space online. I'm finding that people are having the time, people are able to explore those ideas online and come together. Having said that, nothing beats being face-to-face to somebody. That's the ideal. But when we can't have that, I think this is almost like a third space. This is a very unique space. And I don't think everybody realizes the really transformative power of the online space when you find the right online space for you. And it's certainly filling a gap. So and it's not for everybody, but if you can find that space and if you can find your community online, I think it's been amazing. I think it's been really wonderful.
Yeah, the connection. I was just had a meeting with the Canadian Cancer Society, which is basically a not-for-profit organization outside of the medical system, and they offer a lot of information and peer support, et cetera, et cetera. But really, people who've had a cancer diagnosis bring an incredible wealth of experience and compassion and so many abilities, and yet somehow we're not able to tap that next person who has the cancer diagnosis into that system. And I really, mean, if I had my way, I'd have from day one, you have a cancer diagnosis too, you have to go to this group meeting. It's happening once a week or once every couple of weeks. And that would actually tell people, A, how to negotiate the medical system, because they actually have to learn to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
And B, the other kind of very practical things they can do to empower themselves. And I would say an exercise program from day one, and also teach them some type of relaxation or meditation technique. What else were you thinking about?
Oh, that's absolutely it. That's absolutely it. I was lucky enough to be able to go to a cancer support center, and I did meditation, did some group work, did art therapy as well, which was again, back to the perfectionism. I thought I can't paint or draw unless it's perfect, and so giving myself permission. I think this is coming up with the theme again. Giving myself permission to just do it. And I remember painting a lot of bridges, because towards the end of treatment and going back to work, I was looking for a bridge. I was looking for that transition. How do I transition back into my real world from this world? Or I was very much in limbo. So I felt like I was stranded on that bridge. I didn't belong in a way to the treatment days, but then I also wasn't ready to go back to work and to go back to life again. So I was kind of stranded in the middle of this bridge, and I was looking for, how do I get across this bridge? So art helped me to access that. I did some writing courses, and so I did all of that. But again, I know I'm belaboring the point here, but I think that we can give ourselves permission to do this when we're in treatment, but we don't give ourselves permission to do that a year later, or 2 years later, or 5 years later. And I hope that people know that they're just as entitled to access those services, or they need to be able to access those services as well. And for some people as well, they don't want to be around other cancers. Some people just want to isolate themselves. And I hear people saying, I wish I had gone to with them, but I was too sick, or I didn't really want to. It's now I really would need it. I've heard people say that to me as well. Yeah. So I think about expanding that idea of it. So it's a continuum. We need that continuum of care. It absolutely starts on day one, but it goes on for as long as it needs to go.
Right. And there's no right or wrong. And not saying that everyone should go to an art therapy class or a cancer support center, but there are ways. And let's go back actually to your original issue, which is the medical system didn't warn you about the potential effects of fertility, and so how do we present those type of topics? Because the point is, the medical system can't do it all. Yes, they should have told you about it, but I'm just wondering if there's a way to engage people, engage the volunteers, or engage the bloggers of the world, such as yourself, who can help people right from day one as well. And I guess that's back to your same idea of, there's the online community. If you can find the community that is the right community for you, then that can be an incredible source of support as well.
Yeah, but I absolutely agree that I do think there needs to be a protocol, because I realized that it was like a lottery. So it depended on which hospital you were treated in. It depended on which physician treated you. Some are very sensitive to this and, brought it up from the beginning, and some didn't. So I felt a lot of frustration, and I still do, because I think that's true for several kind of things, is that we need that consistency. So it's not right that it depends on your postcode lottery or where you're treated. So I've done a lot of work around establishing protocols, and I'm on an oncofertility committee, and it's about getting a protocol in. So you literally tick this off. Have you discussed this, and this? So I think we also need to be not all of us can, but I started off by being really strong, vocal around that, and that whole bit about the stories and the healing. In fact, when I was focused on that, I wasn't focused on healing. So the whole healing aspect and the stories and all of that came afterwards, but I had to get this out of my system first. And I think you find that a lot of patient advocates are incredibly strong and will move mountains so that somebody else doesn't have to suffer what they did. And that's not just in cancer, it's in everything. And parents in particular are amazing advocates, and for their children. So so we need to we need to, it's not enough just to say we can't do everything. So we need to treat people in a very evidence-based way. So now I've got off my soapbox on that. I've forgotten what the rest of the question was.
No, it's
yes.
it's totally.
Yeah. So then I guess what happens is when you don't find the answers, you go online, you Google, and I think we also need to encourage, and we need to encourage people. I actually, when I started talking a lot about online space, I had doctors come to me and say, how can I make my patients stop Googling? And I said, well, actually, no, it's not about making your patients stop. It's about you starting to enter that online space and to be that trusted voice and to point us in the way of directions, because we have a huge access to information now, but we still need context and we still need expertise. So I hate this them and us, you know, this doctors on one side, patients on the other, and you know, let's all come together. Let's try to co-create this. And I see amazing things happening online with some doctors that are involved in the breast cancer chat, BCSM, and they're right in there in the conversation and they're listening to what their patients are saying. There's a radio oncologist called Matthew Katz, and he said, you know, it's made him a better listener, and that he can really hear what the patients are saying. So I think sometimes, and I am not physician bashing at all. Some of my best friends are doctors. I work with doctors a lot, and I know the great heart and the great willingness and the goodness that is there in them. But again, sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So I think that when we can enter this online space, and really it's a conversation, and if we can listen to each other. And also for me, I carried a lot of anger around about my doctor who didn't tell me about the fertility. So I had a lot of that around, and then suddenly I hated all the medical profession. But through social media and through the work that I'm doing, I've seen that, you know, the doctors are human too, and it's that humanity. So I think we can nurture that humanity more, and that we can nurture that learning from each other. Because, you know, physicians and healthcare professionals are experts in disease, but patients are experts in how disease affects us in our everyday life. And I really love that idea of valuing the two different forms of expertise, that they don't compete, but how can we bring it together? So how can we value the patient expertise and the clinical expertise, and how can we learn from both? And I actually think there's a huge potential in social media to do that. And I see it happening, and I find it very exciting and very hopeful for the future.
Yeah, no, it is. For me, it's that marriage of the two, right? So you have kind of medical expertise, but you have this lived wisdom, and I just think there's such an incredible capacity on that side of it. But it does. You know, I'm very kind of pragmatic, and so I think about that, and I say, well, then right from the get-go, right when the person enters the medical system, we should be able to say to them, here are some fantastic online resources that we really endorse. You know, connect with these possible communities. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it just sounds so simple. And why not? You know, instead of setting it up to fail, which is, you know, every piece of information on the internet is wrong. No, every piece of information on the internet is not wrong. So we need to start educating patients on digital literacy, health literacy. We need to start that in schools, on how to navigate I feel that very, very strongly, that this is, I mean, look, the tide is not going to turn. That ship has sailed. We are now in a digital age. This is how we get our information. This is the most convenient way. 1 in 6 or 7 Google searches are for health. It can only get more. It's only going to grow. So I just find it ridiculous, bemoaning the use of social media and bemoaning the use of Dr. Google. Let's start working with it, and let's start really making great resources. The likes of the Mayo Clinic do fantastic work in that area as well. They do great videos and great information. And I think we need to start having those go-to places that we wouldn't even imagine going anywhere else, because we're getting what we need in these spaces.
Right. Agreed.
And
yeah.
My soapbox issues.
No. Do you know what? So the Healing and Cancer Foundation, which is the charity that I lead, we're actually now just going to produce that kind of what you need to know type thing. How to, I mean, there's a lot of that stuff there already, but I'm going to package it so that it's easier to understand. So I mean, we're thinking the same thing, but I was shaking my finger, saying in a positive way, saying that's it, because you know, the idea is let's change the consciousness of society, and so bring that type of education, that type of perspective into the educational system from high school onwards. Like, why not teach people how to navigate, negotiate the medical system, how to, find good health, discern the quackery from, the legitimate. I mean, we really need to empower people with those skills, because as you say, this is going to happen, or this is happening in the big way.
Yes,
So
absolutely. So it's really short-sighted to I think Lies, who's the not the medical director, but he's the social media director for the Mayo Clinic. And I think he says something like, it's like debating gravity. I mean, it's, it's all around us. So he also says that, this is where I think this is where your patients are. So this is actually where you need to be to meet them as well, and to provide that information. And that's absolutely so true. And I also think we need to start co-creating information with patients. So have patients create the information as well. It can be medically vetted, it can be clinically authorized, but have patients create the information. Because we learn best from each other as well. And we need to start breaking down those barriers, and we need to start just all in this together. We're all learning together. So yes, I'm a big believer in co-creating solutions with patients, not creating them, then giving it to the patients, but having them right from the very beginning. I think that's hugely important when it comes to, to all these health apps and digital interventions. The majority of them are not being used. I think Accenture did the research showing that hospitals are given out a lot of different apps and digital health devices, and very, very few of them are being used. But I think partly that's because they're actually designed they're not designed with how the patient lives his or her life and what the patient actually needs. So we need to start valuing that expertise and to designing solutions with patients.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's really great. I mean, I'm also within Canada, there are many not-for-profits, charities, and so I think that's actually, they're creating the programming already. They're creating the kind of the patient originated programs and videos, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's this endorsement piece that is really the key to all this.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, anything else on your mind as we're coming to the close of our podcast? Anything else that we didn't cover that was really some message that you want to offer to a wider audience?
Any other soapbox that I haven't jumped? No, I've really enjoyed talking to you, Robin, and I always so value when somebody understands that power of story, and I'm so glad that we got to talk about that. And again, maybe just to tie it all together again, that we're all human. All of us, those who provide help, those who receive help, and we all have our stories. And I think that those stories can be that point of healing, and it can be that point of understanding. And in order to understand each other, we need to listen to each other's story as well. So I think not being afraid of our humanity, and really bringing that humanity back to healthcare, because not everything can be cured, but everything can be healed. And we don't always, and I think with a lot of physicians as well, they're trained to cure, and I know that they can get very frustrated and very upset when they have, and feel that they failed a patient when they haven't cured a patient. But even if you can't cure, you always have that ability to heal. We all do, and I'd love to see more understanding and more talk about that, about healing. And sometimes that's what patients want too. So, patients can accept that they can't be cured.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of anger and pain around somebody who want to heal you or help you heal, or actually not even heal, journey with you through the healing process. Sometimes the doctor it's such a foreign land, it's such a strange land, it's such an alien land, that sometimes the doctor is the only familiar in that strange land, and can be the person to take your hand and to guide you through it.
Yeah. The person on the rock.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
So I fully accept, and I know that there's been a lot of deaths recently in the breast cancer community of young women, and it's been very painful. I can just about accept that at the moment we can't cure cancer, but I don't accept that we can't heal the woundedness and heal those spaces. I know that there's a lot of work to be done around end of life issues as well, and we need to start. So probably to bring it all back in full circle, when we talk about day one of diagnosis, we can't also ignore the end time as well. So we need to also, we need to also prepare ourselves for that as well, and we're afraid of that. So we need to be so much more open around those conversations. How can we to every single step of that journey?
Well,
deep thoughts.
Well, people don't have to come to the weekend retreat now. They can just listen to your podcast. Just read your blog.
No, there's no substitute for meeting people.
For face-to-face, yes.
This is just a substitute.
Yes, no, it was wonderful to connect with you face-to-face. I'd like to finish off with just about a 2 or 3 minute meditation visualization, because I'm kind of in that heart space after you
that would be lovely.
That heart story. So, so I'd ask for those who are watching is just to find a good posture in your chair. Maybe bring yourself off the back of the chair a little bit. And maybe just feel that sense of strength in your spine and feet flat on the floor. Just do about a minute of kind of mindfulness meditation. We'll set a kind of heartfulness and intention from the end of the podcast here. So sense of being grounded, sense of the feet being connected with the earth. Bring your attention to the weight of the body in the chair and just allow that to be however it is. And bring your attention to your spine, that sense of strong, solid spine. And bring your attention to the front of the chest, and that kind of sense of rawness, that sense of vulnerability, that sense of open heart. That's our humanness, that strength of spine and our open heart. Bring the attention just now to the breath and just be very curious. A sense of gratitude for this wondrous breath. We'll move on to the visualization part of it. So imagine that you're beginning to warm your heart with a deep sense of compassion, deep sense of caring. Generate that sense of warmth, that sense of loving kindness, right at the heart level, in the middle of the chest. If you need to, you can bring to mind a loved one, the image of a child, or a different time in your life when you're really connected with somebody, and allow your heart to warm. Like the element on a stove, or the sun rising in the morning. Bring to mind someone in your life who's suffering in some way or form. Think of that person and just send them your love, that wish that they find healing in whatever way is best. Care for that person. Allow your heart to extend to them, that they find happiness, that they find healing. Bring to mind the ones in the breast cancer community that you've known recently, their loved ones. Extend out that sense of loving kindness from your heart space to everybody who's been affected by breast cancer within Ireland, within Canada. Send them your love, send them your deep compassion, that they may find healing. And from that limitless source, send it out again to everybody in the whole world who's had a cancer diagnosis. Everybody everywhere, the recent ones and even many years ago. Send them your love. And anybody, anywhere who's suffering in any way or form, send them peace, send them happiness, send them healing. And release now any sense of visualization, just coming back to the sense of being grounded in your body, connection with the earth below, gravity. The out breath, allow your mind to release into the space around you, sense of possibility and openness above. And realize that your good human heart connects the two. Ding! Thank you so much, Marie. It was just absolutely wonderful to speak with you today, and just, you have so much wisdom to offer. In one single go, you summarized so much great stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for being such a compassionate listener. That means a lot to me too.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful day. Thanks for spending the time. All the best to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.